Welcome to Gerald Ford Museum. My name's Jim Kratzis. I'm the Deputy Director here at this institution. Our Director, Elaine Didier, could not be here tonight, and she sends her regrets. As you could see walking in, all the blank gray walls, I apologize for those, but beginning tomorrow, they're going to be filled with art for Art Prize. We have 27 artists this year. Many inside, most outside. They come from Michigan, the four corners of this country, and tonight I had the pleasure of meeting two of the artists from London, England. So we're very excited about that. Last year we had over 230,000 people come in during Art Prize.
Something's
This year, okay, microphone?
Do you have an audio tape?
How we doing? I see them busily working up there.
Try that.
Yeah.
Is that any better?
Yeah.
And you
Good move.
you didn't have the pleasure of hearing my opening remarks. I'm sorry. But we had over 230,000 people last year for Art Prize. This year we think we'll be exceeding that. So if you want to come down here, pack a lunch. It's wonderful, but it is a sea of humanity, to say the least. After tonight's program, I encourage all of you to go up and see our latest feature exhibit, Taking the Seas, The Rise of the American Aircraft Carrier, which traces the history of the aircraft carrier from its inception all the way down to the new USS Gerald R. Ford, which is scheduled to go into service, I believe, next year. In the exhibit, you'll see such highlights of Jimmy Doolittle's Medal of Honor, a hand-drawn map of Pearl Harbor by one of the pilots who was one of the leading Japanese pilots who came in and attacked there. He hand-drew this map and gave it to the Emperor personally. And we have that, and we have many artifacts from the construction and christening of the USS Ford. So I hope you go up and see that. Upcoming events include a day-long symposium on October 20th entitled The Rule of Law, Gerald R. Ford and the Constitution, sponsored by the National Constitution Center, the Economic Club of Grand Rapids, and the Gerald R. Ford Foundation, as well as the Ford Museum. Featured speakers will include former Supreme Court Justice John Paul Stevens, former Secretary of Treasury Paul O'Neill, and Steve Ford. I want to thank the Gerald R. Ford Foundation and its Executive Director, Joe Calvaruso, for its support of our programs and exhibits. And without much further ado, it is now my distinct pleasure to introduce Gleaves Whitney, the Director of the Hohenstein Center for Presidential Studies, who will present tonight's speaker. Thank you.
I think if I use my classroom voice, you can hear me, right? Okay. Anybody not hear me? Okay. Well, first of all, Jim, thank you very much for a very kind introduction, as always. We have a very special partnership. Joe Calvaruso at the Foundation, Jim Kratzis, and Elaine Didier at the museum. I think we have a unique and special partnership in the United States. Part of this vision goes back to President Don Lover's vision of having an institution here in Grand Rapids that could marshal both the academic community and the great strengths that this museum brings to this community. So we're proud of that partnership, and we carry it on. To understand the genesis of that partnership and understand where Don got the idea, you go back to the relationship between Ralph Howenstein and Gerald R. Ford. They go back to the time when they were opposite each other in the gridiron and the football field. So we move forward from there, and you can see the partnership as we have it today. We take that partnership very seriously. I want to take this opportunity to say also that Ralph could not be with us this evening. He sends his best, however. I saw him this afternoon, and he's here. His family is here, representing him in spirit. Where are the Hound signs? Oh, there you are, right there. Markle. Thanks so much for your all's continuing involvement in the Houndstein Center, your interest in what we do. We couldn't do this without you, so we really appreciate it. And that goes, Ralph supports both the Ford Foundation and the Houndstein Center, so very much a joint project, so we appreciate that very much. Now to Don Markle. Here's our author this evening. Kind of an interesting situation because it's very hard to introduce somebody whose career was a secret. What do I say about you, Don? I mean, I've never quite been in this situation before. He has almost 4 decades of work in the Department of Defense and Intelligence. And so you go out and have a beer with him and you say, well, Don, what did you do? He's silent. Nothing. I've never joking. Maybe later tonight I'll be able to get some pearls. But all this to say that I've had by indirection to figure out some of the contributions that Don had as a Cold War code breaker, cryptographer, and somebody who contributed to our knowledge of the whole development of the science of cryptography over the years, especially during the Cold War. Very, very valuable contributions. Now, in addition to his professional work for all those decades, you got to realize, because he couldn't speak about what his work was, he had to become an historian to write about the things he loves, because he couldn't write about himself. So he became a first-class historian in espionage and the development of the intelligence community in the United States. Now, Don has written some distinguished books. You know that from the biography that you've no doubt seen up to this point. I would point out that he also has a real fine ear for storytelling, and we're going to get some great stories tonight. I would also, for the professional historians of you out there, just mention 2 things briefly. Don's book on Ralph Houndstein broke new historiographic ground. We have a lot of works, a lot of histories about the generals at the top of World War II. We have a lot of work about the common soldier, both very valuable historiographic contributions. Don's book on Ralph Houndstein is one of the first efforts to look at the officers sort of in the middle, in the mid-range, who did so much to make the war effort successful for the Allies. So we owe him a big debt there. And then also, I think the book he's going to be speaking about this evening, in the birth of espionage in the United States, no one has done this work before. He is breaking new historiographic ground and filling in what happened at the beginning of our nation and make it possible for us to survive the war, win the war against the British, and go on and thrive. So he's really made some great historiographic contributions. It is my honor to ask Don E. Markle to come to the stage and give his talk. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Dave. I don't know who in the heck he was talking about. Well, I'm glad to be here with you this evening and talk to you about the Revolutionary War. And that's a war when I was in school, and I would assume when all of you were in school. You talked about the Revolutionary War, and you did it in about a day. You talked about the Continental Congresses. You talked about Washington. You may have discussed Valley Forge, and you may have discussed Yorktown, and that's it. That's the Revolutionary War. Well, unfortunately, that's not the Revolutionary War. And when I started doing this, looking at the intelligence activities of the Revolutionary War, I found that it definitely was not true here. There was an advanced organizational concept used during the Revolutionary War that you never hear about. And I want to explain that to you. And if you think about that time period, if you think about how in the hell, with the transportation as slow as it was, communications as slow as they were, how did Washington command from Maine to Georgia? How did he do it? The answer is he didn't do it at all. It was by delegation and a very intricate system of organization and skills that were done here. And from the military side, you had the military departments, which I'm going to talk about. And on the other side, you had the Continental Congress. So those two things were pretty important parts of all this. Now, when you start talking about the intelligence in the Revolutionary War, you can't start in 1775. No. The intelligence activities of the colonials began in 1765, 10 years before most people even gave it a thought. What happened then? Well, the British had fought the French and Indian War, cost them a lot of money. We're not going to pay for it. You, the colonies, are going to pay for the French and Indian War. And so that's when the increased taxes started to come to the colonies. In early 1765, a group of men in Boston formed the first Sons of Liberty organization. It soon spread to New York. And everybody thinks of the Sons of Liberty in Boston. By the end of 1765, every single colony had a Sons of Liberty chapter. It was throughout the colonies. What was the purpose of it? The sole purpose of it was to keep track of what the British were doing and to combat against the high taxes that were being forced upon us. So that was there. So by the time you get to the beginning of the Revolution, it's already there. It's already there here. So you get to the early periods here, and what's happening here? First Continental Congress meets, and it met in 1775. It had nothing to do with revolution. That was not the point of it. The whole point of that First Continental Congress was for tax relief. They were not concerned with separation from England. It was for tax purposes only. And so that was that one. But things are happening. Things are happening here. And, excuse me, in April of 1775, First Continental Congress is in session. And at General Gates, British general in Boston, and by the way, Boston is under siege, he hears rumors that Concord, a little town about 20 miles from Boston, was hiding militia military goods to use in case of a battle. So he sends two young men up to check it out. They come back and they have this very detailed map about where all of this material is hidden. And so on the 7th of April, General Gates says, okay, all right. We're going to plan an attack on Concord and Lexington. That very night, to show you how efficient they were, Paul Revere, Dr. Reverend Dawes take off from Boston, to warn Lexington and Concord of an impending attack. Now, Longfellow wrote The Midnight Ride of Paul Revere, which is all you know what. These two men start off for Lexington, each one by a different route. Makes sense. One gets stopped, the other one will get through, right? They get to Lexington. Warn them. The next morning, they're going to take off to Concord. Well, Reverend Dawes goes one way, and our good friend Paul Revere goes another way. And Paul Revere picked up a young doctor by the name of Samuel Wolcott, who was just going to ride with him, just for company and a little bit of cover. Reverend Dawes gets stopped. Not going to make it. Paul Revere gets stopped. Not going to make it. The man who warns Concord of the impending British attack is the young doctor, Dr. Sam Wolcott. You never heard of him, have you? He's the one who got there. Revere never got there. So they get there on the 8th of April and warn them. The attack on Concord, the shot heard around the world, occurs on the 19th of April. Well, guess what? The colonists had all kind of time, and the British go up there, and they have this wonderful map, and they find absolutely nothing. Everything had been moved. Everything had been moved. Now remember, while all this is going on, the Continental Congress is still meeting. This is all at the same time here. So they're there, they come back. So there's a very good example of how intelligence did work for the British at all. Now there's a wonderful story no, I can't be sure. British General Gage married an American lady. And most of her family were loyalists, but nobody was sure about her. And the legend is that on the 7th of April, before Paul Revere's ride, how did he know? How did Paul Revere's people know that this was going to happen? Well, the legend is that in front of her, the general was discussing with his aides what he was going to do, and he decided on Concord. And she turned and gave it to the Sons of Liberty. Maybe true, maybe not true. Interesting part of all that is when the British finally leave Boston, Mrs. Gage goes to England and never comes back to this country, so nobody's quite sure what happens on that one. All right? But they're there. Then you have the Second Continental Congress. Now, in each Continental Congress, there were 56 representatives. Each Congress, now for instance, the Second Continental Congress lasted for years. They never went home. Some of them were in that Congress for 6 years and never went home. The Second Continental Congress comes around. This one is beginning to think maybe we want to split with England. Maybe we want to just do away with this. And they start getting active in what they're doing here. And they start thinking, we really need to think about how we're going to do this. And so they start by naming the people they want to have. On the 14th of June, 1775, they create the Continental Army. It didn't exist. They created an army in name only. In name only. What they ended up doing, Massachusetts, Connecticut, Rhode Island, had on their own created what they call the Army of New England. It was just all the militia groups up there. There were about 18,000 of them. That became the core of the Continental Army. The next day, they named George Washington as the commander. of an army that doesn't exist, okay? Why do you pick George Washington? Why do you think you did that? Well, if you're going to have a man commanding a large army, you don't want a man who may have been a lawyer and his only managerial skill was managing his law clerk, right? George Washington, first of all, had fought in the French and Indian War. He knew about intelligence. Secondly, he's tall, very military looking. Third, and I think more important here, George Washington's estate at Mount Vernon was over 2,000 acres, minimum. He had 700 slaves on that property. What is that telling you? Here is a man who could delegate and run a large operation. And he did it with his overseers. And here's a man who understood the value of intelligence, because if you have 700 slaves, you need to know what's going on in their minds. You want to keep track of what's going on here. So that's how George Washington, I think, was picked to be the commander-in-chief of the army. The next day, and all this, remember now, the British are still here. This is a year before the Declaration of Independence, to put it in context here. The next day, they develop what they call the military department concept. And this is where the key is, I think. Military concept department was, they took the land mass and broke it into geographic pieces. There was a northern department, there was an eastern department, there was a middle department, there was a southern department. What does that mean? Each department had its own TO&E, it had its own commanding generals, it had its own intelligence operations. It was a completely autonomous unit. So Washington is the head of the whole thing, but he's got all these 10 units that are operating very much on their own, very much on their own, completely on their own. Was it effective? I would tell you that it is, because if you look at the 10 most significant battles of the Revolutionary War, Washington was in command in only 4 of those battles. The other 6 were totally fought by a military department command structure. So you have a decentralization going on here. And this is very true on the intelligence side. To show you how far they went here, it's a man by James Lavelle. He was a math professor at Yale. He was a member of the delegation from Connecticut to the Congress. Well, the British, when they first came over here to fight this war, we were a bunch of country bumpkins. We didn't know anything. So they did not even come with a cipher system of their own. Right? They brought one over finally. James Lavelle broke it. And so for the entire Revolutionary War, the colonialists were able to read any British cipher message they got a hold of. Any of them. Well, James Lavelle goes to Washington and he says, you know, hey, this is really neat. However, if a troop in Georgia gets a hold of a cipher message, they have to send it up here to Philadelphia for me to read it and then get it back to them. That's useless. By the time they get it back, it's old hat. It's no value at all. Why don't we teach each military department to have its own code breakers? And that's exactly what they did. And so after that, and we know what we know happens because General Greene, who was the Commanding General of the South, sent Washington a letter and said, hey, we did it, we broke one, guess what we got? So they decentralized it down like that. And it worked very well here. So that's the military side of all this. Now, on the other side, look at the Congress. We had no central government. We had nothing like that. How do you do it? They did it by committees. The Second Continental Congress, believe it or not, had 456 committees. One to get shoes, one to do this, one to do that. All these things to do. How was they going to do it? And that little group was pretty effective because what they did, they said, okay, Washington, you're going to take care of the military intelligence side of the house, okay? We will take care of the international side of intelligence. And so they formed committees. They had a committee for secret correspondence, and that was to talk to their ambassadors abroad using the codes and ciphers. They had a secret committee. The secret committee, what did they do? They were in charge of trying to get loans from other companies or to buy supplies from other companies, that sort of thing. They had a committee of three. Three happened to be Benjamin Franklin, Thomas Jefferson, and John Hancock. They were the propagandists. And many people don't realize this, but we were flooding Canada with propaganda, trying to get Canada to break away from Britain and join us as well. Didn't happen, but that's what they were doing. So you had all these committees that were in operation. And they were very effective, what they did here. We had a commission for detecting and destroying conspiracies. Now, they were in each state. And they were counter-espionage. That's what they were doing. Were they effective? Mm-hmm. The one in upstate New York informed Washington of Burgoyne's plan to come invade from Canada and come down through the Hudson River Valley and join up with Clinton. Washington knew of that plan 14 days before the king even saw it in England to approve it. So they're effective here. Another thing which they think, when you think how advanced these guys were, and they were really advanced here, the Committee of Safeties. Well, what are they there for? Well, every state had a British governor. If in the war things got a little too hot and the governor left, who's going to run the state? So the Committee of Safety was there. In case the British left, they would take over so that state would be kept under control. Pretty effective way to do it. Pretty effective way they were doing here. So Washington, when he leaves to go up to Boston to take over up there, he knows, okay, I've got the military intelligence. It's my business. They're not going to mess in that. That's my job. On the other hand, they have the international side of it. They're going to take care of that. I don't need to worry about that. Pretty effective here. So he leaves and goes to Boston, take over an army that doesn't exist, soon does exist. And he's up there, and he gets there. Boston's under siege, and he gets there in June. Well, take a bunch of ragtag guys, this is what you had here. To get him into an army is going to take time. So nothing happens in the fall, and then you get in the winter, and in those days you didn't fight in the winter. You didn't do it. You didn't fight at night. You didn't fight in the real cold winter. So he's up there, and the first thing he realizes is, I'm one person. I'm getting information left, right, and center. I can't possibly handle it all. So he sets up a thing called his, excuse me, his military intelligence cadre. Bunch of young guys, smart guys, a lot of them spoke French. And he said, okay, you take care of all the correspondence and everything coming in on the Southern Department. And you look at it. If you think I need to see it, you bring it to me. But if you don't think I need to see it, you take care of it, you file it, you keep it, so forth. So now he's got a filter in here. Worked extremely well. All through the war, he had that group. Hamilton was one of the guys, Talmadge was another. They were really very bright guys. And they knew what they were doing here. He depended upon them completely for his intelligence. What do you get here? So he's up there, and in the spring, he decides to show his feathers. And Boston sits in a bowl, surrounded by Dorchester Heights, completely surrounded by 3 sides by Dorchester Heights. Washington shows his real talent for deception. On the 9th of March, he takes 3,000 troops at night, and he takes the cannons. He wraps straw around the wheels so they won't make a lot of noise. He builds big wooden frames and fills it with underbrush so he can put that here on the road, and then you can move the equipment behind it and they won't be able to see it. And he completely fortifies Dorchester Heights. The British have no idea that he is there at all. He's also clever enough that he has these 3,000 guys working all through the night to do this. They fill barrels full of rocks and put them in front of the cannons so they could roll it down the hill if they had to. And these guys are getting tired. So he said, okay, guys, you did your part. Now, you go off and 3,000 fresh troops come up. So if we have to fight the battle, they're here. They're going to be here. Next morning, General Howe wakes up, gets out of bed, stretches, and like he always did, he looked up to Dorchester Heights, and guess what? He's facing nothing but cannons looking down at him. He has no idea how they got there. No idea how they. He is going to counterattack, and luckily for Washington, there was a heavy rain, so Dorchester Heights became muddy, couldn't do it. 3 days later, the British leave Boston. General Howe says to General Washington, Boston is too beautiful a city to destroy. I'm leaving. So the whole British leave, and they go to Nova Scotia. At that point, Washington then says, okay, I've done up here. I know where they're coming next. They're coming to Washington. They're going to come to New York City. So he takes 9,000 of these green troops, moves them to New York City, puts them on Long Island. They're there, and sure enough, in June, here come the British. 9,000 Americans against 30,000 British. Not very good odds. The British are on Staten Island. Washington is on Long Island. There was a young German, not a young German, he was 40-some years old. He had been a baker in Philadelphia. He was known as the Gingerbread Man. And he joins the Continental Army. And he soon becomes Washington's baker, called the Continental Baker. Great. He spoke fluent German. So what do? They send him on Staten Island to go among the German troop, the Hessians, as my wife calls them, the Haitians. They're not really that. And find out what was going to happen here. He did this regularly, to go down and talk to him. Nobody ever suspected a thing here. And so finally, in 19th of August, there's a battle on Long Island. starts early, late in the afternoon, so it really doesn't get going here. Darkness comes. Again, Washington. He has 9,000 troops. He puts them in rowboats and rows them across the East River to Brooklyn Heights and moves that entire army and all the equipment during that night. And again, the British wake up and he's gone. He's not there. He's not there. And that's where he picks up the name the Fox. General Cornwallis says, that damn fox got away from me again. So he's up there. He's up there and he thinks, you know, I need some information about what's going on in New York City with the British. So he puts out a flyer saying, wanted, one spy, going to New York City. Had a little trouble finding one. And finally this young, naive kid said, I'll go. That's Nathan Hale. Washington made a huge mistake at this point that he never made again. He never met with Nathan Hale. He never saw Nathan Hale. Nathan Hale was 6'1", tall for that time period. He had carrot red hair. He had freckles on his face, and he had a burn scar on one cheek. He goes into New York as a very poor schoolmaster. He's wearing a very expensive silver buckle on his belt and 2 silver buckles on his shoes. Talk about being obvious, right? And what does he do? He goes into New York City, and the first person he runs into is his cousin who's a loyalist. He had no instructions. They told him no codes, nothing. Just go in and see what you can find. So Nathan Hale is caught, tried, and hanged. After that, Washington never sent a spy out that he did not meet personally and talk to them, get a sense of them, and that sort of thing. You know, it's common sense. If I wanted to infiltrate this room, I would not put a 20-year-old in here in bright clothing, right? I would put a middle-aged person, probably a little gray, probably some glasses, average height, average weight. And when he left, what are you going to tell me? Nothing. Perfectly innocuous person. The other thing about Nathan Hale, we don't know this for sure, but in 1590, the British passed a law saying, if you are arrested for treason in any of our colonies, you will be sent to England, where you will be tried, and if you are found guilty, you will be executed in England. We don't know if there was another American before Nathan Hale tried for treason and strung up by the British. Records are bad. We don't know that. It's not there. We don't know it. So that's Washington. That's what goes on there. Now the Culper ring. You probably heard of the Culper ring. It's the one everybody writes about. It's the big gun. Washington leaves New York. British are going to stay there. He knows he's going to need information on the British. So he goes to one of his aides-de-camps, Talmadge, and says, I need a spy ring. This is the only one that Washington himself sets up, the only one. And it starts in Setauket on Long Island. Now, it gets a lot of attention. But remember, its entire function is to keep track of what's going on in New York City. They had no authority, no business, nothing outside of New York City. It was just for that area. Why is he doing that? Because he's doing all these other things all over the country, and he wants to make sure that Clinton's troops are staying in New York. And so that's why Culper is a real part of all of this. Real part of all this here. So it goes on here. Now, it's fun. And each one of these groups now, each one of these military departments had its own spy organization. They all did it. Every one of them did it. And there are some interesting parts to all of this here. I've got to find where I am here. Okay. Northern Department, upstate New York. There was a family up there by McGinnis. They were loyalists. The husband was a Mohawk fur trader. He dies. His wife, Sarah, continues the business with her family. She is an outspoken loyalist, to the point that the rebels come and burn down her house, and happens to be that one of the sons is in the house when it's burned down. And so she flees and goes to Canada. She is 67 years old. And in the 1750s and 60s, that's old. That's quite old for them. She goes to Canada. The British in Canada are very concerned about keeping the 6 Indian nations on their side. And a big part of that was the Mohawks up in that area. Sarah spoke Mohawk, was known to the Mohawks. And they said to her, Sarah, would you go down and live with the Mohawks? Just do it for the winter. And she does. She goes down. She's with them for the winter. Now, why the winter? Well, during the winter they didn't fight, and they were trying to make sure that nobody else was going to turn these Indians during the winter. She does it very successfully. She comes back, and she's so good, they send her back the second winter. So for 2 winters in a row, she is down there propagandizing and keeping them on their side. Very successful lady here. In New England, one of the members to the Continental Congress, excuse me, was a Dr. Benjamin Church. He's a delegate from the state of Massachusetts. And he's a English spy. Pretty good here. He is sitting in all the meetings of the Continental Congress, and then he is reporting back to the British everything he hears, everything he knows. Very successfully doing it. They're getting a little suspicious of him. And then he is in Philadelphia, and he writes a very long letter, 2 or 3 pages long, and he puts it into cipher. And then he does something which is absolutely the most stupid thing a man could do. He gives it to a mistress who he had just broken up with. And says, take this back to Boston. Right? She takes it back to Boston, okay. Gives it to a colonialist butcher. It ends up in George Washington's hands. It's in cipher. What are you going to do with this? He calls 2 of his bright aides-de-camp, gives them each a copy of the letter, says, here, translate this, come back tomorrow and tell me what you get. They come back the next day, and their translations match exactly, so he knows he's got the real McCoy. They arrest Church, they try him, find him guilty of treason, and then they have another real problem. The book on the conduct of the war talks about treason and penalties for the military. It does not mention civilians at all. So, He's convicted of treason, no penalty. What do you do with him? So, committee formed, and they rewrite the conduct of the war, and they put in there, okay, you guys, if a civilian, you're going to get hanged like the military. They give it to Washington. Washington says, I can't do that. I can't now. He's convicted, but I can't. When he convicted him, there was no penalty. Now you're telling me you got a penalty. And so they don't do it. And interesting part of all that is, okay, it's in the conduct of the war book. U.S. Constitution is written. Article 3, Section 3 defines treason. And it says that conviction of treason, the penalty will be established by the U.S. Senate. Have you ever known the Senate to do anything? Between 1782 and 1916, there was no penalty for treason in this country. None. It was only when the saboteurs tried to land on Long Island in 1916 that said, hey, we really need to do something about this. So there's a pretty important case right there here. Now you get down to the middle department here. And this is a fun one, I think. I love this one. As you can tell, I like the people. I like the people stories here. Washington's at Valley Forge. He's no dummy at Valley Forge. Look at the formation at Valley Forge. Philadelphia's here. Washington's here. His troops are shaped in a horseshoe with the back of the horseshoe open. The Indians, the Oneida Indians from New York, are bringing food down and bringing it into him because they could get it in that way here. He starts, again, this time, there's nets working in Philadelphia, and he's got a young officer there, and he works with him. The officer never goes into Philadelphia. The spies come out, and they know where he's going to be at night, and they come and tell him what's going on here. These two gentlemen, again, deception. They used it here. Washington, when he was involved in deception, he wrote his own messages were totally false, but they're in his own handwriting, so it could be absolutely right. And they were very effective there with that one here. And then he had some other people there. He had a lady, a Quaker lady, and Quakers aren't supposed to be involved in war. It's naughty. We're supposed to do that. This lady had a whole Quaker net. And she would gather information. She would take it. She had a way of making it her own little shorthand. And then she would put it on a button and sew a cloth over the button, sew it on a coat, and her son would take it and deliver it. Totally affecting, totally affecting. And to show you how naive some of the British were, she had a rather large house. They came to her one night and they said, Mrs. Dara, we want to use your main room for a meeting tonight, so put your children, put everybody to bed at 7 o'clock. Right? She did, except for herself. And she found a place where there was a gap in the wall in the paneling and she could see through. And she went there, listened to the whole thing, and delivered it to Washington. And one of the things you can find in Revolutionary War battles, in a lot of the cases you can find a direct result between a spy's report to a general and the results of a battle. A lot of times you can't do that. And a lot of times it's because of their own records, because after a battle, a general is supposed to write an after-action report. Well, if you really want to look bright, you don't say that Joe Schmo, one of my agents, came and told me this. You say, oh, I was sitting there thinking, and I realized that this is what was going to happen, right? So that's what they would do. They would do here. Another famous example of that is before the Battle of Saratoga, which is one of the huge battles of the Revolutionary War. An innkeeper in Saratoga Springs was asked by the American general to infiltrate the British camp and come up, see what he could find out what they're going to do here. And he did it, came back. He knew exactly what they were going to do here. He told the general, and that resulted in the defeat of the British at the Battle of Saratoga. I went to the battlefield up there and went into the National Park Service place and said I wanted to find out about what they knew about the spy from the Battle of Saratoga, and they said, oh, there wasn't one. So you have to be careful how you do this sort of thing here. Okay, but there were some others here. There was a man, this one's rather famous. His name is, I'm having a senior moment. Jerry, the Medal of Honor winner. Oh, anyway, it'll come to me. It'll come to me. Anyway, he was a Britisher, or in America, and Washington says, I need someone to go over to the other side and find out what's going on. Tell me what's going on here. And this guy, what it meant, you think about what it meant here. You are going to go to the other side and you are going to be a deserter on the American side. Kimball. And they convinced him to do this. He goes over to the other side. Stays a little longer than he thought because he got sick and they put him in the hospital and all that. But this guy had a photographic memory. He comes back and he dumps what he's learned over there to Washington. Absolutely just gems and gems of things of what he hears here. To the point that during the Revolutionary War, Washington decided that he needed to have a special badge of merit for very, very heroic actions. Only 5 of them were ever given that we know of. And this young man got one of them. It was shaped like a heart. It was purple in color. And in 1929, when they established the Purple Heart, guess what? It's shaped like a heart. It's purple in color. And it has a profile of George Washington on it. So it is a casting of that original medal that was made for George Washington's troops. Here. Now our friend comes back and Washington says, you did great work, but I'm not going to put you back in a Connecticut regiment because they think you're a deserter. I'm going to put you over here, a different one here. So it wasn't until 1932 that his hometown knew that one of their favorite sons was not a deserter, but in fact had been a decorated spy during the Revolutionary War. There's free stuff here. Now you go down south. You get down south. And what happens here late in the war, and you all know this, the British think, we don't give a damn about New England. There's nothing up there but rock. We want to keep the South. Because that's where we're making money. That's where tobacco is grown. That's where cotton is grown. That's what we want. Also down south, you could fight almost year-round. because of the weather. So the South becomes the focus of all this here. And there were some interesting things that took place down there. Paul Revere's ride, whoopee! There was another one. Guy's name was Kimball's. He is up in sort of the corner of Virginia, and they learn that the British are going to be heading into the interior of Virginia and Carolina, just to show that, you know, because that's where all the militia were getting into trouble. Get rid of them. This guy gets on a horse. He rides 100 miles in 24 hours, kills 3 horses on the way, and he gets down to Kings Mountain and gets all the troops to gather there, and there's a big battle there, and it was a defeat and a victory both. The British kind of won it, but on the other side, for the Americans, the whole battle was fought with militia. There were no regular army troops there at all. It's totally militia. So there's another Paul Revere ride here. Other ones. We're down in Virginia. And there's a big family down there, the Armistead family. They had a house servant, James, who really wanted to get in there and fight. And his master said, I can't let you do that. Because if I do that and we win the war, you're free. I'm not going to do that. He says, what I will do, I know Lafayette personally. And I will get you assigned to Lafayette as kind of a valet and assistant type of thing. In that case, when the war's over, you come back. So James Armistead becomes sort of an aide-de-camp to Lafayette. And Lafayette realizes this guy is pretty smart cookie. So he sends him into the British camp. And Cornwallis is there. And he says, oh, well, you're a house servant. So he puts him in the officer's mess as a waiter. Imagine what he's hearing. He takes it back to Lafayette. Lafayette then turns around and passes totally bogus information. Armistead carries back to Cornwallis, back and forth here all the time through the whole war. Extremely beneficial here. When Cornwallis comes to surrender and Lafayette is riding on his horse, he's a little surprised because right next to Lafayette is a black man, James. After the war, he goes back into slavery. Imagine that. Goes back into slavery. Lafayette comes to this country in 1824, and he visits the Armistead house, and he says, what are you guys doing? This guy was a huge instrument in the Battle of Yorktown. And here he's in slavery. So he goes to the Virginia House of Delegates, petitions them, and in 1824 they free him. And Lafayette says, and by the way, your name is now James Armistead Lafayette. Think of these stories. They're real. They really are real. They really are real. There's wonderful ones. Ladies played a role in this, big role. The men were all fighting. So the ladies took up, especially in the South. Northern ladies were a little too prim and proper, but in the South, these are pioneer ladies. There were 2 sisters. living together. Their husbands are off fighting. And they're living together. And two British couriers on their way to deliver messages to a general stop and want to have dinner and rest for a while. Lady say, oh, okay. They feed them. And then they say, you can rest for a while, but we have to go do our chores. They go out and they put on men's clothing. They get on horses, ride a little ahead, and when those couriers come through there, they stop them and hold them up and take all their messages. That's not the end of the story, which really is funny, I think, because they go back. Those two British couriers go on, deliver nothing. They come back and they stop at the same house for a meal on their way back. Pretty good here. Another one, before the Battle of Cowpens. An Indian lady, half Indian, tall, 6 feet. Kate Moore Barry. And she, being part Indian, had a lot of Indian tribes that were developing information for her. They would bring it to her. What are you going to do here? They come to her one day, and they've got information about how the British are going to approach. And she knows that she has to get this to the American general Martin before the battle starts. Okay? She only has one problem. She's alone in a home with her 2-year-old daughter. How's she going to do this? No problem. She ties the daughter to the bedpost, gets on a horse, delivers the information, comes back and unties her daughter. That lady was the victor of Cowpens. She gave them all the information they needed to know to put the troops to that. So all of this is going on here. Again, to show you the duplicity of how you do this. Before the Battle of Yorktown, in 1781, 7,000 French troops land in Newport, Rhode Island. To show you how simple things are. The British know they've landed. They watch them as they march across Connecticut, all the way to George Washington at White Plains. They don't bother them. They just let them march. There they are. Watch them. They're here. They get over here. They get over there, and Washington wants to use them to take New York. The French say, you can't do it. It's too big. Too many fortifications there. So then they decide what they're going to do is they're going to take Yorktown. Okay? Deception works. Washington, to show you how he does this now, he leaves the commander of the Northern Department at White Plains, and he says, I want you to continue just convincing the British that you're going to invade New York City. I want you to do that. A whole bunch of phony letters are made in his handwriting. He gives them to a courier who walks close enough to the British lines that he gets taken. Oh, guess what? They got all these letters. They're of no value at all, but they think they are, okay? He puts French troops on the northern shore of New Jersey in their bright red uniforms, thinking that the French troops are going to be there to go into New York here. All this is going on here. He then takes 1,000 of his men and 5,000 Frenchmen. They break them into 2 columns, and they leave White Plains, New York, and they are in Philadelphia before Clinton even knows they've left New York City. Think about that. They're down there. The French fleet is waiting for them. They get on the French fleet ships. They go down. Yorktown, bingo. That's it. Deception here. Western Department, two Moravian ministers are out there. They organize all kinds of Indian spy squads. And of course, the big thing out there is Fort Detroit, right here. That was the British enclave there. So, and they would report weekly back to the Western Department on what was going on with Fort Detroit. So they knew that. In conjunction with that, there was a man by the name of Oliver Pollock. He was the commercial agent for the colonies in New Orleans. Why? That goes on down there. New Orleans was French. He convinces the French to close the Mississippi River to British shipping. British ships are no longer allowed to go up or down the Mississippi. American ships can, no British. He then convinces the Spanish to bring their cattle from the western part of the country to New Orleans, sell them to the United States government. Those cattle were put on ships, taken up the Mississippi, up the Ohio River, and delivered to Fort Pitt. So now you had meat coming in from this sort of thing. Pretty clever stuff going on here. Very clever stuff going on here. Always through here. And all of this, again, all of it. Culper Ring maybe that way, and maybe, a little bit about the Yorktown, but all of this other is self-generated or generated from within that one military department. That's how they did it. That's how they did it. People talk about Washington sleeping everywhere. He did. Because the number one priority for the British was to kidnap George Washington so they could take him to London, have a show trial, and hang him. So that's why he's constantly moving around like this. We had the same thing. We had Benedict Arnold. Washington was given notice that there was going to be an American general defect. No name was given. No name was given. When Benedict Arnold does jump ship, all hell breaks loose here. Washington wanted exactly that. He wanted to kidnap Benedict Arnold, bring him back, have a trial, and hang him. He sends a young Sergeant John Camp into New York. His entire mission is to kidnap Benedict Arnold. Well, he's a sergeant major. It's pretty high rank. Benedict Arnold recruits him, and he's now part of Benedict Arnold's American Legion. And he's still working. He's got this plan all done. They're going to kidnap Benedict Arnold and put him in a rowboat, row him across the New Jersey shore, and there would be the troops waiting, and away would go Benedict Arnold. They even knew the night they were going to do it. They knew that when he came to his house, the last thing he did was have a potty break down at the end of the lawn. He would walk down there and do that. So they had even taken away the white pickets so they could get him out. Well, the very day they're going to do this, Benedict Arnold moves on board the ship, and that's that, so they don't get him. To show you, again, Washington's thinking on this. John Camp was fine at that point. Had he come back, but he didn't come back right away. He stayed with Benedict Arnold's British American Legion, and he fought in Virginia against the colonies. So when he does come back, Washington says, no, you're a deserter. No, no benefits. You fought against the Americans, so I'm not going to touch you. So all I'm trying to say is, most people look upon Washington right here. You know, he's the spy master. And he was, in a lot of ways. But look at all this other activity that takes place, totally unrelated to him. You get the technology, and how's my time doing? Okay. Get to the technology. 1717, the Turks developed a way of inoculating against smallpox by using live vaccine. Revolutionary War comes along. Washington gets reports that the British are sending troops who they consider to be smallpox carriers into the towns and into the American forts to spread smallpox, because it wasn't in this country at this point. Well, Washington's concerned because he has a lot less troops than the British do. He can't afford to lose any. So when they are in winter camp in New Jersey, he inoculates 9,000 of his troops against smallpox. Pretty brave thing to be doing here. Pretty brave thing to be doing here. John Jay's brother, James, physician in London, plays around with invisible ink. Traditionally, visible ink is you write something, it fades away, you hold it near heat, and it'll come back out. He develops one that you put it in, it fades away. The only way it will reappear is you have to have a reagent, another different solution to rub across the page. Then it'll come out here. You can hold it up to a candle as long as you want. It's not going to come out. That is pretty clever, because when Washington would use a secret message, secret ink message, he would send the message by one courier and the reagent by another. So if the message fell into enemy hands, they don't have the solution to bring it back out. They don't have it here. Okay? And then in 1771, a young man at Yale, James Bushnell, started developing the first submarine. And it worked. It looked like a big egg. One guy would sit in it, he would pedal, as fast as he could pedal, and on the front of that egg was a spar, and on the end of the spar was a mine, like a chestnut burr, all sticky. And so the idea was, you ram the hell into the ship, the mine's going to stick, then you backpedal real quick, and it'll explode. Bingo, right? Well, he's developing this during the war. And was very successful doing it. In fact, if you go to Groton, Connecticut, you can see one. They have it there. But he had a friend, and he would write to this friend telling him exactly how well he was doing with everything. He would give the letter to the local innkeeper, who was acting as the postman. Well, that innkeeper would open the letter, make a copy of it for the governor of New York, put the other back in an envelope, and send it off. So by the time they get the turtle, it was called, they get it to New York Harbor, and they're going to try it, guess what? All the ships have metal on the bottom of them. It can't stick to the metal. So they were never successful with it. But it was there. It was there. It was there. So it's pretty active war here, period. And I think what I try to get across here is, look how it works here. Those military departments, independent, functioning on their own. Yes, they were under command of Washington. And when Washington and his army would come into that department, he did not take over the department. The man who was in charge of it continued. Washington was just passing through or doing something. So very differentiated here. And then you have the political, you have the constitutional side of it, where all the world stuff and everything is being done in a separate arrangement. So it's a very separate organization. It's not willy-nilly at all. It is well organized, totally well organized here. The war ends, 1781. Guess what? The British troops do not leave New York City until November of 1783. Why are they there? Well, you think about between October 1781 and February of 1783, that's about a year and a half. Think what's happening in the colonies. Intelligence is still a very important part of all of this, because you have a lot of English still there. Are they going to stay? Are they going to integrate into the American society? Are they going to leave? Are they going to take with them? What are they doing to subvert the Constitution? All that. All this is taking place. It's still there. And that part of American Revolution history, I don't think anybody even touches it. It's there. It's a real part of it. It's a real part of it here. Now the war ends, and War of 1812 comes. The British are within 12 miles of the White House before the Americans have any idea where they are. The whole system had fallen apart. You get to the Civil War, the first ever United States Army and civilian secret service was formed in January 1st, 1863. The Union Army, General Sharp. It's called the Bureau of Information. The very first one, ever. Civil War ends, and guess what? It disappears. World War I comes. There is one officer in the United States Army responsible for intelligence. One for the entire Army. He is assigned to the National War College, and he uses the students as his analysts. Very professional. World War II comes along here. Now, I will tell you that the code making and code breaking, that part continues right through the war. Until 1920, I'm going to say 3, Simpson, who was the Secretary of War, discovered that we were breaking other people's codes, and he said, "Gentlemen, do not read other people's mail. You will close that down immediately." So they moved it to New York City. Okay? World War II comes along. Until spring of 1942, there was nothing in this country. OSO was formed, and that was the first. Before that, only the cryptanalysis part was here. So I will tell you, well, I think, if you look at the end of the Revolutionary War until the beginning of the World War II, I think it's 172 years. I think for that 172 years, the American Revolution still puts the American intelligence operation to shame, because they were better organized, they knew what they were doing, and they knew how to do it. Okay? Now, I want to just, if I can read it, the lighting is just a little, not the greatest here, but I want to read you a statement, which I think is just as appropriate tonight as it was in 1776 when George Washington said this. The necessity of providing good intelligence is apparent and need not be further urged all that remains is to add is that you keep the whole matter as secret as possible. For upon secrecy, success depends in most endeavors of this kind, and for lack of it, generally, however, the plans will fall apart. That's true today, just as true as it was then. So did intelligence play a role in the Revolutionary War? It sure did. It sure did. Were blacks involved in it? Yes. Were Indians involved in it? Yes. Were women involved in it? Very definitely women were involved in it. Very definitely women were involved in it. It was a very independent thing. Very independent thing. And I don't think they get their fair shake for what they did. Even if Paul Revere didn't get the Concord, that's incidental. He tried. So, okay?